Nice.
But I just remember, I'm like, okay, so it's us and Ron Jeremy on the label.
All right. Well, let's get this going, man.
So, yeah, I mean, basically just introduce yourself and kind of talk about what you do and, you know, how you and I know each other and stuff like that.
Well, my name is Ilker Yücel. I'm the editor-in-chief for ReGen Magazine, which is an online publication for primarily goth, electro, industrial music.
Have you guys ever done print, or has it always been online?
It has always been online. We had thought about going to print for a while, and we realized that even if it wasn't a dead medium, it wasn't a very viable, lucrative medium.
Yeah, print.
It would have been prohibitively costly. So we didn't ever go to print, and it worked out for the best, really, because everything is online now. So
yeah. I mean, print's dead, but ReGen's always been like, at least being an artist and being a fan, you know, industrial music both, ReGen's always been one of the big ones. It's always been like, that's the magazine that if it's not in there, don't trust it.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, but I've always felt that ReGen has sort of been struggling to be recognized as you know, a credible source of info. Perhaps I'm wrong, and this is my self-deprecation talking, it could be, but I do tend to think most people think of Sideline, Brutal Resonance, and even, God forbid, even Gothic Beauty. Even though ReGen actually has history, having been founded by Nick Garland, who is a former Industrial Nation writer.
Nice.
So in a lot of ways, ReGen was his attempt to continue Industrial Nation, complete with his original misgivings about Sideline's connections to Alpha Matrix and constantly giving Alpha Matrix artists all the greatest reviews, and, you know, eventually that wore thin, and it's never been my focus since joining ReGen because, quite frankly, I don't have time to read other publication. You know, it's hard enough to maintain a day job as well as do ReGen as a passion. Never for money, never for recognition. ReGen is really just what I do because I love this scene and I love this music.
Well, and that's why, I mean, obviously you don't do it for recognition, but that's why you personally have the recognition, because people, especially the artists, know that you do it for passion, you know?
I hope they do.
You know, being an artist and talking with other bands, everybody, you know, from KMFDM to Combi Christ and, you know, all the bands that we've talked about in the past, everybody knows you personally. Everybody knows who you are. It's a very personal kind of thing. So.
Off topic, it's funny you mentioned Combi Christ because there was a moment on the recent tour where I could swear that Andy LaPlegua was staring right at me, giving me the most hateful look. And I've never spoken to him. I've never communicated with him personally, and I've always considered our coverage of Combi Christ to be fair, if not glowing. We never outright called them out on anything. I think everybody else in the scene and those who have had altercations with them in one form or another have handled that well enough that I don't need to feed any gossip machine with any kind of negative publicity. But again, you know, I'm also someone who personally, if you know me, you know my opinions, and they are rather strong. So perhaps in my limited ego, I had a moment of thinking, he probably hates my guts, because that look on his face. But then again, it could have just been his natural, you know, expression for all I knew.
I mean, if he's on stage, I've shot people dirty looks on stage and yelled at my crew.
Oh no, this was not during the stage. This was off stage.
Oh.
This was, I'm outside smoking a cigarette. He just walks by and he just leers, and I was like.
And then you're suddenly going, what did I write? What did I write? Like,
does he know me? You know? Not even what did I write, just thinking, does he even know who I am?
Does he remember me?
So, well, again, I've never met him, so, you know, if he knows who I am, it's certainly not by my attempt to communicate with him. I've never tried. So, yeah, sight unseen as far as I know. On the other hand, Joe Letts did hang his head in shame, and I have communicated with him briefly and very civilly and not, you know, rudely or meanly at all, but, you know, he did kind of have this look of like...
Yeah, they were definitely getting a lot of heat. He was the focus of it.
Yeah.
Deserved or not, it was definitely it.
Oh, I think it was deserved.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not going to be the one to write about it. I don't write. I've never wanted ReGen to fall into the trap of anything that could be, I guess, tabloid fodder.
Gotcha.
You know, I mean, not that the goth industrial scene has tabloids per se, but you know, I don't need to feed a gossip machine that is going to be there anyway.
Yeah. Well, you've always the articles have always been honest but fair. I've never seen you play favorites, even with people, you know, artists you have personal relationships with.
I try.
You'll still be like, okay, well, you know, you're my boy, but that's a 3-star. Sorry.
Yeah, I do try, and that's another reason I got rid of the star ratings as well. Partially to avoid that, and partially because they were just starting to become inconsistent, and they didn't mean much. And plus, I felt they were distracting. You know, originally they were a way of sort of solidifying a review, and over time they just became, you know, extraneous and ultimately distracting. You know, it would be, how come you gave this 3 stars? Read the review. You know? Eric Powell of 16 Volt even said, actually, at the Cold Waves performance a few days ago, he said, I think some people think that you're in my pocket. You know, I mean, look, you know, 16 Volt, negative space, I liked that it was different. You know, I liked that Black December was different. I get that it wasn't what people like about 16 Volt necessarily, but, you know, hey, I mean, a band does the same thing for 20 years, they run the risk of becoming AC/DC, you know? So,
exactly.
That said, you know, in retrospect, that's the worst is when I write reviews and then I think about them in retrospect and think, you know, maybe I was wrong. But, you know, what can I do?
What's the curse of any artist or creative person? You're constantly going back and critiquing and analyzing your work, you know. Like you said earlier with the not realizing where ReGen stood, that might be a case of, or you tell me if it is or not, but maybe you're too close to it, you know. Like I've done that with my projects where with Human Factors, like with 7 Factor, like I'm like, man, nobody's hearing us, nobody knows who we are, we haven't done really anything. And then like at Cold Waves, I saw, you know, a girl comes up like, oh, I saw you on tour you played First Ave, and you guys were this and that.
It's a great feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm like, how the fuck do you know that? You know, like, and then you start realizing, you know, through emails and conversations that like, oh, okay, people were paying attention, you know.
Right.
And I think with ReGen, maybe you're too close to it that you don't realize that it's like how big of an impact it has on everything.
It's definitely partially that, and again, partially because I'm very self-deprecating, and I just, you know, I don't think very highly of myself or anything I do. So, you know, it's the opposite of ego.
So with ReGen, like you said, you don't do it for money; you do it just out of pure passion. And what drives you to constantly do that? And what challenges have you had to overcome with that?
I think psychosis has something to do with it. Certainly a little bit of madness, and partially my tendencies towards self-destruction in one case or another. Thankfully, I don't drink nearly as heavily as I used to, and nor do I drive home blackout drunk, so we can rule that out. Although there was a period of time where I was doing that, and thankfully ReGen did not suffer for it, to the best of my observations. But no, what drives me, I don't know of what to say other than a sheer love of the music and the people that are making it. I feel like to this day, you know, industrial and gothic music and all of the sort of various offshoots and branches and subgenres and whatever else that is somehow connected to it is considered the, quote, biggest, smallest scene out there. You've got rock, you've got punk, you've got, you know, you've even got blues and jazz, if those have scenes, which they do, although they're probably a little more classy about it, and whatever you want to, you know, whatever those scenes are like. But, you know, it does seem like everyone at least identifies what those are. To this day, you can still say to people, oh, I listen to industrial music. what's that?
Yeah.
What does that mean? And then you usually have to find like some kind of, groundwork that they can understand, like Nine Inch Nails,
right,
or Rammstein, and then try to explain where what you listen to differs from that, but otherwise that's all they're going to understand.
But I think the genre as a whole has always had this extremely, I think, one of the most dedicated fan bases of any genre of music.
Absolutely.
But the artists, I mean, this is a community spanning 30 plus years of artists that, for the most part,
40
yeah, you're right. These are artists that have done this kind of like you and I are talking, where it's for the passion of it. Not a lot of the musicians. I mean, we saw at the Wax Tracks thing the other night where these guys are on labels and they're touring the world, but they're coming home to a day job, And this was when the music industry as a whole was still doing really well. But outside of Nine Inch Nails, not a lot of people broke that mainstream. They stayed with a extremely dedicated fan base. I mean, there
was a glimmer in the 90s, I think, especially, and this is something that, as much as we like to sort of decry the TVT acquisition of Wax Tracks, and rightfully so, it was also beneficial in that it did bring that style of industrial music into the mainstream, even though these bands were younger, maybe not sucking, maybe they were sucking on the teat of the mainstream a little bit. It was still nice to hear something like Gravity Kills or Stabbing Westward.
Yeah.
And even KMFDM to a lesser degree, or, and Nine Inch Nails on MTV, and think, okay, industrial is getting some kind of attention, although it's frustrating as fuck because we've been doing it for 10, 15 years, and here are these young upstarts copying what we've done and getting all the money and all the fame and glory on MTV. And at the end of the day, we accept them as well, because they too were like us. I mean, it's not our fault that they came up a little bit later and were in a better position to get signed and fall into those record industry traps of, well, we just need another Nine Inch Nails, so can you write some pop songs and do it in those heavy industrial styles, and we'll get some good producers to polish it up and put you on MTV. And I think for a long time we begrudged them. I know I did. I still have this very vivid memory of referring to Stabbing Westward as, in fact, I didn't refer to them as this. I was quoting a magazine article calling them industrial time wasters. And yet I still bought the records.
Yeah.
So it was like, oh, they're not real industrial, as I slip my $20 to buy the CD or whatever, and then go home and still listen to it thinking, man, but I really like Shame, and I really like What Do I Have to Do? And
I think Stabbing Westward was a lot like Nine Inch Nails and a lot like even 16 Volt, where they're writing pop songs. I mean, they're writing catchy pop songs covered in this industrial wrapping paper. But
even Skinny Puppy did that. And people like to ignore this. Chris Short, a very dedicated promoter, and I guess he runs a label. I'm not clear on what the distinction is anymore these days. It does seem like musician, promoter, label head, all of them are just kind of interchangeable these days.
Yeah, some of us wear many hats.
But Chris Short and I once got into a big argument about pop music, and he hates pop music. He to this day does not understand why anybody likes Depeche Mode, or why are they relevant to the scene. And it's like, well, they had their industrial moments.
Yeah.
Construction Time, again, yes, poppy, but very industrial. And
it's that same industrial umbrella.
Exactly.
And the same community.
And even Throbbing Gristle acknowledged that while a band like Skinny Puppy maybe took what they were doing with a track like Subhuman or Hamburger Lady and taking that to the next logical step, Depeche Mode came from United or Hot on the Heels of Love, and something a little more rhythmic and, yeah, a little bit poppy, maybe less sardonic about it, but they all came from the same place. And I think this was the nail in the coffin for the argument with Short, was that I'd said, if you listen to Far Too Frail or Smothered Hope, those considered two of the greatest early Skinny Puppy tracks. Those are pop songs.
Yeah.
Just because Ogre's singing in a rasp through through a distortion box, those are two catchy songs. Those are pop songs.
They're disguised though. I remember when I really started getting into music production and really creating songs and understanding what it took to make a hit song and when it's not, things like that. And I started looking at Skinny Puppy, but really Nine Inch Nails was the one that I really sat and looked at it. And for me, Nine Inch Nails was always this kind of almost like a dirty secret. It was this thing that I knew about, and it was this evil kind of anti-pop thing that it's like, okay, you guys listen to your NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, but I have this over here. And then I was I just remember analyzing it going, fuck, those are pop songs in disguise.
Especially Pretty Hate Machine.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that whole, I still love the story Eric Powell told about the first time he heard it. He fucking threw it out the window, something or other. He hated it so much, and it took a while for it to grow on him.
That's crazy.
As we all love it now. So
there was you mentioned newer artists and with the Nine Inch Nails and the Skinny Puppy connections. I always thought, Marilyn Manson, I knew those guys and saw them when they were the spooky kids in Florida way before they were doing anything except small little bars. And even then, it was something different. It was something, every other band in town was doing death metal or wanting to be Limp Bizkit.
Yeah.
And then there was these guys that were totally different. But when the Nine Inch Nails influence came in, and they went, Manson went about as mainstream as you can go, and they had those industrial elements. But then during the Antichrist tour, and he's coming out on the stilts, and I'm like, that's Skinny Puppy. Nobody else knows that.
It's Skinny Puppy, a little bit of Alice Cooper as well.
Oh yeah,
and certainly no small element of Kiss in there. And that's the other thing is, I think, for all of the bravado of being anti-mainstream, anti-pop, anti-hair metal, like the grunge period was.
Yeah.
But we all kind of love it. Most of us kind of have, whether satirically or just because we can't help ourselves. We all kind of love those old ladies, hair metal songs.
Oh, especially in LA, there's you go down the strip and it's a time machine.
Yeah. You look at Amir Durak from Orgy and Julian K. Not arguably. I think he is a genius when it comes to guitar and electronics. What was one of his earlier bands? Rough Cut. They were about as hair metal as you can get.
That's like Skull with Shotgun Messiah.
Mm-hmm. A funny story there is I'd forgotten that he was in a band prior to that first Scold album that I was watching way back in the day when I still had television and still thought music videos meant something. I still do, but obviously YouTube now is a different animal. But I was watching VH1 Classic, I think it was, and the Shotgun Messiah video for I Don't Care About Nothing comes up. I spent the entire video looking at the bassist thinking, why does this guy look familiar? Even though he had long blonde hair, he had the white Fender bass, but it was a left-handed bass upside down, and he's doing the bitch toss with it like CeCe DeVille, and the whole time just thinking, why does he look familiar? And in one shot where just he had like that face, that inimitable skull face, and just thinking, holy fuck, that is Tim Scold. This is his first band.
Is that the video? Because I had a very similar experience, and I just remember the beginning of the video, he's like, this is Tim or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, and the same thing, I'm like, Tim?
Yeah.
Why does this guy look so familiar?
Hey, this is Tim.
Yeah.
And the rest of the band, whatever names they had, I don't remember any of their names.
It must have been the same video, because I just remember I've seen this fucking guy.
Yeah.
I know this guy from somewhere.
That's Tim Scold. So, yeah. And actually, it's funny because on an episode of the podcast for ReGen Digressions, we had a hair metal episode, and the question was posed, did anyone ever like come out of the hair metal period and successfully foray into industrial? And it took me the whole show before it, Tim Skold, Shotgun fucking Messiah.
Yeah.
And so
immediately I think of anybody coming out of hair metal and transitioning as Pantera.
Interesting, really.
Yeah, their first stuff was so...
Oh, well, yes, their early albums definitely...
They didn't go industrial, but...
Van Halen, the 80s.
It was so hair metal.
That's true, and then they created a heavier and more extreme sound that is all their own, definitely. Motley Crue had a very brief period in the 90s where, Nikki Sixx dyed his hair red. I think they were going for... It wasn't really metal, it wasn't really industrial, it wasn't really alternative, it was some amalgam of all of that. And that was the other thing about the 90s, I think, was that because industrial and goth was sort of being assimilated into the mainstream, we had the Spawn soundtrack where, Filter and Crystal Method team up, Marilyn Manson and the Sneaker Pimps, Slayer and Atari Teenage Riot.
I forgot about that. Wow.
But then you have the Lost Highway soundtrack with mainstream stuff like Manson and Nine Inch Nails and even Smashing Pumpkins, and all it was a Billy Corgan solo song.
Yeah.
But then there's Rammstein and Barry Adamson and this other weird stuff on there. And then throw in some classics like Bowie and Lou Reed, and you just have this dark...
Which is the influence for all the other artists on it, all those guys.
Or even the Crow soundtrack. So much of that whole 90s period, it was just all... thrown in there into that just sort of subcategory of alternative, or super category. Actually, it's not a subcategory.
I remember I was living in Omaha, Nebraska, and I walked into a record store, CD store, in a mall, and I heard Thrill Kill Cult playing in the store, and I was like, "What fucking world did I just walk into?"
Right.
Where I'm in like the cheesiest upper. Mall, and I'm hearing Thrill Kill Cult, and I went to the guy, I was like, what is this that's playing? He's like, it's the Crow soundtrack. And I was like, oh, okay. I knew that nobody working here just randomly went, we should play Thrill Kill Cult.
What is this? This looks interesting. No, that looks like devil music.
Yeah, exactly.
And, but then subsequent to that, from the 2000s on, you listen to any alternative metal, alternative rock band now, they all kind of use the same production techniques, the same tricks, and the same sounds that those 90s bands were. I mean, there's a band out here called Nine Electric.
Love those guys.
And they're I don't think they identify as industrial rock or industrial metal, but they're clearly using a lot of those 90s tropes that, Gravity Kills, Stabbing Westward, Filter.
Power 5000.
Yeah. And, even Rob Zombie, not industrial, but clearly is not afraid to use a drum machine and synthesizers.
I've always thought of Rob Zombie as industrial. I don't know.
I do,
maybe
too.
That makes me an asshole. But.
No, it doesn't. No, but this is my point, is that for a lot of people, he would be industrial. I think the fact that he's considered a mainstream artist and that he's known in the mainstream, again, not unlike Nine Inch Nails, although I think Nine Inch Nails have transcended it in a lot of ways as well, but that's another story.
As soon as you go mainstream, they take away your industrial stripes, like you're no longer an industrial band.
It is kind of
you can't sit with us.
Yeah, it is kind of a, we laugh, but that's kind of true, like. And I think that gets to the heart of what the argument with Chris Short was, is that, like, it's not necessarily pop, it's just that idea that this is supposed to be our thing, it's supposed to be industrial, it's supposed to be underground, the mainstream's not allowed to have it.
Yeah.
And whenever they do, and they take it for their own and copy it and mass produce it, and all of a sudden it's lost its validity. It doesn't lose its validity, because at the end of the day, all these bands are still here.
Yeah.
And... well, not all of them. Some of them are, unfortunately, not. But, the sound is still here. We still have, we have Cold Waves. We've got other festivals like Terminus and Enfest. And I don't think it's going away.
No, you have bands like KMFDM that's selling out on their tour.
Oh, yeah.
You know, still. Mm-hmm. And, you know, myself having toured with KMFDM, I saw every night the crowds, but not just the crowds, I saw the people that were there.
Right.
And it's, you know, people that are in their 40s and 50s with their teenage kids that are both equally as into the band, you know, like it spans these generations, but in 2017 they're still selling out clubs. And then you have newer bands that are emerging like Three Teeth and Kanga, which I thought was amazing.
Kanga, I think, is destined for greatness.
Oh, absolutely.
She is fantastic.
Yeah.
In everything that she does, from having the pop melodic sensibility to very theatrical but very simple live show, which is what I love most about it, is that there's not a lot to it, but it feels like so much more than is actually going on. Well, and it's just because she is I think a very natural, energetic performer.
It's not something like, let's do these things because it's going to be theatrical. It's, you're witnessing the actual creativity of the artist.
I love a band that is willing to do that, especially if they're, you know, it's not about money as much as that it shows that they are willing to actually take it further, and that it's not just music, it actually is the artistry of a complete package of audio, visual, and even characters to a degree. Not necessarily to be fake, but to immerse the audience in something outside of, you know, just going to a show and listening to the same songs you hear on the radio and shouting yeah, 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 and listening to the millennial whoop like 50 times over the course of 2 hours.
Well, a lot of people have said industrial, you know, a lot of people have said rock in general is dead, and if you look at the Billboard charts, that's definitely how it appears, where the only rock band that's touching the charts is 21 Pilots, you know. But
I've never heard of.
Yeah, right, exactly. But you know, and people are like, oh, well, if rock's dead, then industrial's really dead. Yeah, because they're not even, you know, ever acknowledged by the mainstream. But I think it's still holding on just as strong to its underground roots because, you know, like I mentioned, the Three Teeth and Kanga, these newer bands are doing really well and doing a lot of cool stuff. And then you have bands like KMFDM that are still starting at the beginning, so to speak, and are still selling out clubs.
Yeah.
You know, worldwide.
I think a lot of it just has to do with the fact that, you know, in a lot of ways, I've spent a long time agreeing with people who say, oh, the scene is dead, and sort of not giving new bands a lot of credit, and really it's just because a lot of industrial's problem, I think, is that it never could firmly identify what it was, because everybody did something different. And not unlike what we saw in the Wax Trax documentary, everybody sounded different, and every song sounded different. What differentiated one project from the other? It was the fact that, oh, but we got a different vocal style, and he brings something a little bluesier, so that project's going to be more bluesy, this one's going to be a little heavier.
Like all the Ministry side projects.
All the Ministry side projects, exactly. I mean, and then you have like Buck Satan, you know, arguably it's just country, but, you know, it's still kind of industrial because it's so outside of the norms of anything. And so the scene is never dead, and it never will be, because there's always going to be somebody who's going to say that it's dead and is going to go and do their own thing with it, and that's going to breathe fire into something that other people are going to do. But I think the reason it exists partially out of what I call the symptom of youth. I think every young person, and this is also the punk mentality, every young person needs to feel like what their dad was into is not cool, and is irrelevant, and has nothing to do with them. So they have to reinvent it somehow. Bands like Three Teeth and Youth Code, I'm glad that they exist, but I'm also not particularly a fan of them, because as far as I'm concerned, I've seen and heard that.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they're bad, and it doesn't mean that they don't have the capacity to go somewhere else with it, and maybe somewhere that I'm not going to respond to because I'm going to be an old fart. But at the same time, you know, everybody starts somewhere. So I hear Three Teeth and I think, oh, Well, Ministry and Nine Inch Nails did that 20 years ago. Good on them. Maybe they'll go somewhere with it. They're only 2 albums in.
There's a lot of that in industrial. Like, there's one side is exactly what you were talking about, where there's always been this history of innovation and just creating something new. Throw the rules out the window, you know, beat on a 50-gallon drum and sample it, like do just something weird, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But 20 years later, coming into it where some of these things are almost cliche, I can't count the number of bands, and I feel like I can say this because I'm guilty of doing these things myself.
We all are. That's the sad part. Is that?
But so I'm not trashing anybody, because I'll be the first one to own up to this. But there was, you know, every new band coming out has the, you know, they're covered in cornstarch like Nine Inch Nails, and they got the black makeup up around the neck and the arms, you know, like Cyclone 9 and Nero really kind of made famous. But it was literally
fake blood.
Literally every band looked like a Cyclone 9, Nine Inch Nails clone, and there'd be 10 in every city. Well, not that many, but you know,
not just the look, but even the sound.
Oh,
I totally did not respond to power noise or terror EBM or agrotech, which for me had a different meaning because Clay People coined it first to describe themselves, and they're nothing like what people think of as agrotech, or Electro, which
that's a new one.
I always laugh at.
I've never heard that.
You're lucky. I was hearing it a lot, and I actually deliberately chastised several writers for using that term seriously. Said, you know, that's not something and to this day, I've still said in ReGen, you know, if you use that term as anything other than to point out how fucking stupid it is.
So what are your plans moving forward with ReGen? With you mentioned the podcast, and obviously,
you imply that there is a plan. My plan really is I take every day I take every day at a time, because there's always new music, there's always new artists, there's always old artists coming out with new music, there's plenty of new music all the time. Anybody who ever says there's no good music, there's no good new music, you're not listening, you're not looking for it, and therefore you're not going to find it, because you just want to live in your little fantasy that the scene is dead and that it's going to be up to you to resurrect it. And that's rooted in, again, sort of the childhood kind of a punk mentality. But it's all there. There's plenty of new music and it's always coming out. So I'm always just trying to listen and keep going. And as long as there's that, that's all I'm going to do. I never have any thoughts about, you know, where do we take ReGen to the next level? Let's make ReGen bigger. Let's have a ReGen TV show, as somebody once suggested. And I thought,
or a YouTube channel.
Well, the YouTube thing is a thorn in my side, but that's for other reasons that I'd rather not go into, because I don't want to disparage
like me and
anybody.
Facebook. I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook.
Oh no! Well, this has to do with ReGen does have a YouTube channel that we are no longer in control of. But you know, again, that involves disparaging someone who I do not want to talk about, because I don't want to give him fodder to say that I'm an asshole for speaking ill of him and, you know,
we have our
defaming him or whatever.
Our Facebook page, we're at the rate we were going, we were about 2 weeks away from hitting the 1 million mark, and then they deleted our entire page. Almost 1 million followers.
Jesus.
So talk bad about religion and your page will go.
Well, it is YouTube.
Well, Facebook.
Oh, Facebook. Yeah, well.
Facebook page.
Yeah, well, I think things have changed now there as well. But no, all of my plan has always ever been to just continually try to do the best job that I can, and whoever wants to be on board, you know, and is willing to meet my standards, because mine are pretty strict.
Well, that's why you've been so successful.
Well, I hope so. But yeah, for me, success has not been measured by money or by recognition. So, you know, what has made me successful? I don't know. Am I successful?
I think you are looking from the outside, you know, because one thing I'll say is that you have not just been an observer of the industrial scene, you've had a symbiotic relationship with the artists. The artists create music, but they're able to do that because your magazine and stuff you're doing gives them a voice to be heard more and then create more music. You know, at least that's how it was for me. You were always extremely supportive of us, and it brought us new fans and, you know, opened doors for us in certain ways, I'm sure, and then we were able to do more and create more.
If it did, then I'm happy that it did. There's fewer things that I love more than to hear that something I wrote helped a band out in some way or another. But the other thing that I derive pleasure from is when a band really takes what I've said about them, especially if it's negative, and took it the right way, which was where my intent was, okay, make me eat my words, prove me wrong,
yeah.
You know, and not by screaming bloody murder at me for not liking you,
or sending hate mail, but fix what was wrong, yeah.
But you know, because you thought, okay, well that didn't impress him, maybe this will. That's what I want. I want bands to get better, and I want them to try. And anytime I've said anything bad about anybody, it was never to be a jerk. It was never simply to say, you're a failure and I'm an authority. I'm not an authority. I mean, I make music too, and trust me, I know how tough it is to be heard. And I do my best to listen to as much as I can. I don't always succeed. We get hundreds of promos, like a year. And so many of them get lost by the wayside simply because I'm one man. I have writers who come and go, but it's a tough thing. It is a labor of love, and it is, you know, it has to be for the passion and not for any other reason than that. Because, you know, if you're doing it to get money, or you're doing it to get fame or recognition, or you're doing it to gain favor with someone else, I don't think those are the right reasons, and they're not ultimately going to work out for you anyway. They certainly haven't for me.
Right.
I never gave anybody a good review expecting to, you know, be asked to tour with them. That's never happened.
Right.
I still offer money to any artist willing to remix my bands, you know, and, you know, if they say don't worry about it, then I feel, you know, really grateful for that. But, you know, I'm not going to make any assumptions. I still go to shows on the ReGen press ticket, but I'm never going to assume that that means, oh, I'm full VIP, I should get all access, and, you know, if you're going to give me a photo pass, then I should be able to do this, and you know, I never make any assumptions. I always ask, what are the rules? You know, what, yeah. You know, what, how, where am I not allowed? You know, so, and thankfully, it's kept me out of trouble, and plenty of other people in trouble. As Paul Raven once said, I fucking love people. So.
Well, anything else you want to add, or?
I don't know. I mean, I'm still not even sure if this has been what you were looking for. I'm surprised and honored that you even want to talk to me about this kind of thing.
No, I think that does it for us.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot.